A reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies. The man who never reads lives only one life. This quotation by George R.R. Martin sums up the importance of reading books. Hello everyone, I'm Tasneem Hossain. I welcome you to this wonderful session on how reading books enhances quality of your life. Today we have Professor Mushtaque Ahmed with us. He is currently teaching engineering courses in Sultan Qaboos University in Oman. He had his BSc Engineering degree from Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology in 1981. Later he obtained his PhD degree in engineering from the University of Iowa, USA. He considers himself as an accidental engineer because he says his lifelong passion has been reading books. According to him, the simple reason for him being a passionate reader is to be happy, to be entertained, and most importantly, to keep his sanity in this chaotic world. He has read thousands of books of many genres over a period of more than 50 years. From his vast experience, he will take us today on a journey about his love for books, his love for authors whose books he reads, how books influenced his life and worldview, and all the benefits that we can all have from reading books. Please welcome Professor Mushtaque Ahmed.
Thank you.
Dr. Mushtaque, it's time for us to be enlightened by your years of experience on how books can enhance the quality of our lives, just the way it did yours. Thank you. Please, Dr. Mushtaque.
I will try my best to put some light on reading and how it enhances the quality of my life. First of all, I'm thinking, what am I doing here? This is not my area of expertise. I do mostly water technology related courses. I teach students in that particular field, and I have no academic background in literature. Yes, I do read. Then the question is, what am I doing here? Just because I read book doesn't mean that I can talk the different aspects of reading. But one thing I can tell is that book has been with me for more than last 50 years, and it has enhanced quality of my life. Of course, the question, quality of life, what exactly is it? If you just put it on a Google, you will see that there are a lot of definitions. And there are now actually measurable definitions. United Nations, they actually have a quality of life index for different countries. There are ministries of quality of life and that sort of thing. But let me just read one thing that I was just looking at, that what improves or what makes quality of life. So it says that how to improve or enhance quality of your life. It says that eat nourishing food and sleep 7 to 8 hours per night. Keep company of good people. Avoid news overdose, which is probably a good one. Get regular exercise and do something meaningful every day. Nowhere it says that read books. But then how come I am here to tell you that reading books will enhance quality of life? It is more from my own experience that my life has been extremely enhanced in terms of happiness, and quality of life to me means mostly happiness. Without the books, probably I would not be here. So I will tell you from a layman's perspective what exactly it has done. And I was telling to Manju today that just because somebody eats 2 meals a day doesn't mean that he can talk about food. Similarly, probably I'm not sure that just because I read books that I am good at talking about books. And I have never said anything on this topic. This is my first try. Please bear with me. As I said, that it's a personal history. What is my experience with books, what type of books I like, what I dislike, that sort of thing I'll talk. And I don't see that there is much to be gained, but who am I? This is the question. Who am I? I'm 66 years old. I was born in Bangladesh, but I'm working in Oman as a university teacher for the last 27 years. I'm settled in Australia. I did my, as Tasneem said, my postgraduate studies in the USA, lived 8 years there. Very good years for me because that's where I also found my wife, Lucy, in 1984. 40 years now that we're together, more than 40 years actually. And we have one daughter, and recently we have been lucky to have a granddaughter. So it's a small family. And if you ask me a few other things, that I'm in my politics is extremely liberal. If I'm in the USA, probably I would vote for the Democrats. In Australia, I vote for the Green Party and the Labour. And of course, I'm extremely tolerant of other people's views. And if when I retire, which will happen very soon, I probably will join the Green Party in Melbourne. And that's where I live. I'm interested in travel. I've been to many places. I'm interested in the history. Of course, politics. I love opera. Fortunately, we have a beautiful opera house. Some from Oman who are in the audience, they know how beautiful that opera house is. It's an acquired taste for me. I love classical music. And I like, of course, we have cats. And I love money. And what is money? I have a huge collection of banknotes. I spend a lot of money on that. That's my expensive hobby. And I get a lot of joy and happiness from my hobbies. Okay, now let me go to the next. So I want to show you something. If you look at the first photo, is my wife. On the left side, Lucy. She is from Malaysia. And on the right is my daughter, Hossain. And the little is Layla. And this is the house that we live in Melbourne, very close to the city. And why I'm showing this, there is a reason. But before that, you can have a look at my granddaughter, Layla. She is now 6 months old. And this idea of living together in Melbourne, where we have 3 generations from 6 months to 66 years, between 5 of us, we have passports from 4 countries, different cultures. And how is that possible? And I would say to some extent it is possible because I've been reading for a long time, and reading books probably have taken away some of my biases, prejudices, and of course broaden my global or world view. And that's why I could marry someone from another country, another culture, another religion, another language, and we are still together. That means we did a relatively good job. Okay, next one, I'll talk about my love affair with books. It has been a pretty long. It started since 1971. Those who are of Bangladesh origin here, you know that 1971, I was around 14 years old. It was during wartime, so there was nothing much to do. There were no classes, so I stay home. As a young man, I was, of course, bored. Fortunately, I found a good collection of books. And these books were written, mostly English books. They belong to my father. My father also had a degree, master's degree in English literature from Dhaka University in 1944. That's a long, long time ago. He passed away many years ago. But those books were there. And those books, surprisingly, were quite good, that can actually attract and glue readers. I was pretty good from very early stage in talking in English, not talking, rather reading English. It was second language to me, but I could understand English, read English very well. So some of the books were Somerset Maugham, short stories. Of course, I found books on Hemingway, Nabokov, Pasternak, D.H. Lawrence. Some of the books, as you can see, probably are more for adult reading, but I kept reading. Probably I did not fully understand those, but I loved them. Of course, then I read got a thick copy of a collection of short stories by Guy de Maupassant, that's a French writer, and there are a few others. So for 9 months, all I did was reading books. Of course, we followed the news of the war. And so once I got started, I kept the hobby, my interest in books, and I never stopped. So that's how it started. Now, let me say, okay, I think talking is a bit boring, so you can have a look at some of my book collection that I have here. It's just a few snapshots that as I was telling Tasneem before, that we have shortage of space, so I cannot buy these new hard copy books anymore. But I have hundreds of electronic copies, and if I show this, that my iPad has now few times more books than my hard copy books, but I still love my hard copy books. I like to touch them. I like to smell them, and they bring a lot of joy and happiness. But it does not stop me from reading hard copy books. I think I got a chance, so I should tell you that book buying is a very low cost, cheap hobby. I don't think I have spent even $1,000 or even on buying books. But I have a very expensive hobby, which also brings a lot of joy, is the banknote collection. So I have those, and I will not, there are different types of hobbies, but banknote collection also brings joy and happiness, and which is ultimately that improves my quality of life. As for my reading, I think we'll take a break after a while, and then you can ask questions or comments. That I'm a very selfish reader in the sense that I read for myself. I don't go and talk about these books. I don't give lectures. This is my first venture, actually, in terms of giving a talk about reading books. And reading books, as I said, makes me happy. It really brings joy and happiness, even in the worst mood. If I am sad, if I am melancholic, if I am depressive, books help me a lot. And it has been basically a therapist. It's like medicine. And I'm a slow reader. I don't want to make it hurry. I'm not a speed reader. I don't want to put numbers that I have read this. I read slowly. Sometimes I take weeks to read. And another thing, which probably is something different, that I can read 3-4 books at a time. How do I do that? Of course, I keep books at different places, and even with the iPad, I can do that. I like it. It's not that I get bored with a book, but it's simply that that's the style I have followed. As I said, it keeps me alive. It is a therapy for my sadness, and it has made me a better human being. And that I have a lot of empathy for other people. I would not harm anybody willingly or deliberately. And I think this book reading has helped me to see the vastness of humanity and understand other people's concerns, other point of view. And I think that's the best thing that came out of this book reading, that to get along with people from. And it has also got me out of some of the bad habits of nationalism, fanaticism, and that sort of thing. I think books have taken some of the bad blood from me. So I feel as happy teaching my Omani students here, even if I had taught my Bangladeshi students. I feel no difference. Teaching brings happiness. So I can treat a Bangladeshi, an Omani, an Australian, or anybody from anywhere. And I think it came from my reading of books. And one thing that friends come and go, and I don't have really that many friends, although I have a lot of colleagues and I have a vast number of students, but my books remain friend forever. And although I don't read books second time except for a few, but I keep them. I think they're my friend, and that's how it continues. Okay, what books do I read? And books that I avoid. I read all types, fiction, non-fiction, and I'll show you some books that you'll see all genres. And I have quite a few favorite writers, and I read almost anything written by them and about them. And these days there are videos, there are interviews, there are life stories, biographies. So I try to learn about the writers. And I try to do that for almost every writer and I see that many of these writers, their life story is reflected in there. Some books, knowing the writers, help me to understand their books. Just for example, I was reading lately a Japanese writer who died actually just a few weeks ago. Kenzaburo Oi is a Nobel laureate. And he has written quite a lot about handicapped people. Then when reading, I found out that his firstborn son was born with handicaps. And that actually not changed. That probably formed his worldview, and it comes again and again and again in his writing. And similarly for many other writers, I have done that, and I find out that one thing is that my language skills are poor. I can only read Bengali and English. I live in a country which is Arabic speaking. I don't speak 10 words of Arabic. I'm married to a woman who speaks a different language, Malay, and I don't speak 10 words of Malay. So I'm bad. So English has become my default language. And that's how I communicate with my daughter and my wife and all this. So English is the only language these days that I read. But of course, I read writers from many different languages, but all translated in English. Example, Murakami, Kawabata, Gabriel Garcia, Annie Ernaux, and all these. And old classics, I try to avoid. I don't read much philosophy, although I probably like some of the philosophical slogans or philosophical condensed ideas like God is dead. Then, of course, Socrates' last word, that I am to die, you to live, which is better, only God knows, and that sort of thing. I have read, but I find they tax my brain too much. And as I said, that I want to be entertained, so that's why I avoid. Poetry, I also avoid. And why? There is no good reason. It's simply, that's not mine. And I was trying to say that Socrates was very much against poetry. He thought that it is nothing but manipulation of words, saying words, changing a sequence, and you don't say fully what you mean. You don't say it explicitly. And that was the Socratic view. And unfortunately, one of the judges who actually put a sentence of death on Socrates was a poet. So probably we can call it poetic injustice. Socrates was condemned to death by a poet. Another thing which I should have not done, I don't read Shakespeare. Why not? Simply because that I cannot relate to that time. I find the old English difficult. I should have done that, but it's too late to do that. But that doesn't stop me from reading about Shakespeare. I don't know whether anyone has read a book by Bill Bryson, who is my favorite writer about Shakespeare. And there are so many interesting tidbits about Shakespeare on that particular book. That Shakespeare's actually brought more than 800 words in English language, which is a record that nobody can beat. If you'll be lucky if you can get one or two new words in English language, but Shakespeare did more than 800 words, which is very interesting for me to know. I avoid motivational literature, how to be happy, how to be rich, how to do this, how to do that, simply because I'm too old for that. I see that I'm a bit stubborn, I don't change, so they don't do me much good, so I avoid them. And of course, I don't need to read propaganda literature unless there is some interest in those, such as I read Mein Kampf about Hitler, so I wanted to know how such a man can come up with ideas like that. So that, of course, is a propaganda, it's a book I don't recommend to anybody unless you are interested in the Second World War. I also avoid religious books, especially theology, but that doesn't mean that I don't read about religion. I actually read a lot about religion, and I have dozens of books about religion, but this is not about religious practice or theology. And then there are, of course, books that I find difficult to penetrate. I have given up quite a few of those. I find Kafka difficult reading. I tried Ulysses by Joyce many times. One time I said we went to Dublin, and I thought maybe that reading Ulysses and in Dublin, knowing all the places that is mentioned in the book, probably, but even then I could not. I read Dubliners and other books in Dublin of Joyce. So these are some of the things that is relevant to my reading. And my reading habits, I think I already gave you some tidbits. I read slowly. And I do not have any particular format that I follow, that I have to read so many pages every day, so many words. I don't keep count of those. And I find that many of the Japanese books are Kawabata's books, translated mostly 150, 200, and you can read. And I like that. As I was talking before, that I like hardcover. My house is small, so we don't have much space, and all the walls are full of books. We are here for 27 years, but I think I haven't bought many hard copies lately, but of course, a lot of soft copies, hundreds, thousands of books in my iPad, and I try to. One thing I read, whether it's a good or bad, I read on my bed before I sleep. At least an hour. It's not that gives me very peaceful sleep, but that's a practice I've been following, and I like it. And when I travel, which I used to do a lot, and my wife, we've been to probably around 60 countries, and I try to get books about that country. And sometimes I like reading a book about that particular country or city in that. As I said, that I read Dubliners in Dublin, and I think I will still, because I keep forgetting, this is the book Istanbul by Orhan Pamuk, and I also read it in Istanbul, and I could walk next to that area that is mentioned. So this is also something that I do. I prefer contemporary writers. It doesn't matter which country, where, because I can relate to this. So contemporary means in the 20th century and 21st century, and those books written in that period okay. So now few things: books that make me happy, sad, and cry. So from very early stage, I found that books by Somerset Maugham I like a lot. Why I like the stories. It is simple, straightforward English, nothing complicated. Good storytelling. That's why I like. I like V.S. Naipaul, another Nobel laureate. He also is very particular with his language, with his words, with his sentence making. So they make me happy. Then there are, of course, writers like Orhan Pamuk, Nobel laureate, Kawabata, Nobel laureate, and Murakami. They bring a different source of emotion, more in sadness, more not depression, melancholy. And when I read their life story, I find out where this melancholia comes from. So, but absolutely wonderful books they have written. And there have been few books that I cried, literally cried. One such book is Amos Oz. He's an Israeli writer who died recently. He has written a book, A Tale of Love and Darkness. And it's, of course, his life story, his life stories of his father and mother. It really brings tears to your eyes. Based in Jerusalem in the 30s and 40s. And many of you probably remember Angela's Ashes by McCord. And that's also another book that makes you cry. At least that made me cry. Then there is a very old book that is probably based on First World War, Eric Maria Remarque, All Quiet on the Western Front. That is another book brought tears. And there are others, but I just keep. And all these three books have been made into movies, and you can watch them. I have those I downloaded them, but I don't feel like watching them because of the sadness. And sometimes I think that I prefer sadness to read sadness in words rather than watching. So this is the books that make me cry. And there are modern writers like Paul Theroux, Bill Bryson. They are absolutely wonderful, easy reading. And as I said, that I also love autobiographies and biographies of the authors. It is not that voyeur in me that want to know, but I just want to know what brings them into writing. So it has helped me in understanding the writing. Again, I'm not into deep understanding. If I like it, I read it, but still I want to know. That makes me a bit more intimate reading, and I have been doing that. I was reading one particular book lately. This is about how English royal, that is James I, started dealing with the Mughals. And it's, I think, Sir Roe, he came as an ambassador, and it's based on his writing. And it actually brings a lot of simple, interesting stories. And that one thing as I said, I recently became a grandfather. And love for your granddaughter is something I never knew before. Because this is our first granddaughter. I have only one daughter. And this love for this little girl overwhelms me. Whether it's unusual, I know I saw my father being a grandfather, but when I felt it whether it's unusual or whether it's very common. Then in that book, I found something very interesting story. The story is that these Mughal kings, they used to write their own autobiography. Humayun Nama, Babun Nama, Jahangir Nama. So this Jahangir had a granddaughter, and she died when she was 3 years old. And Jahangir, most powerful monarch of the world at that time, the English monarchy, they didn't count. And he almost gone mad because of. And in his own autobiography, he could not even write about the death of his granddaughter. He actually asked someone else to write about that, although it was his autobiography that he got. So it gave me that I am not alone in this world with this overwhelming love for my granddaughter. So there are, I'm sure, others feel that. And I have now, it is good to know that other people feel that. So that was very illuminating for me, that what I feel, there are others who feel the same way. Okay, now I go with some books that or authors which I have read pretty extensively. One I have to say is Graham Greene. I read a lot, and I sort of like him so much, and I like him not only as an author. He was a difficult human being. Difficult that he was a very strong Catholic. He had affairs, he had mistresses, but he never left his wife. So there are contradictions in but his writing is simply wonderful. So I have many of his books. Of course, E.M. Forster, this is another writer I have read. In the last 10, 15 years, I went to Cambridge few times, at least 5 times, to attend conferences. E.M. Forster was tutor, I think, or master in King's College. It's a dormitory. He gave some of his lectures, famous lectures, in a hall called Dining Hall of King's College. So in our conferences, we always had lunch and dinner at that particular King's College dining room. This dining room is there for last 400-500 years, and as you know, Cambridge, it's simply a wonderful place, very old. And I felt good that many of my writers that I like actually lived or associated with that particular college, Salman Rushdie and others. I read a lot about D.H. Lawrence, and I read it when I was quite young, actually. I don't know whether I fully understood them, but I read them and I liked it. I liked his writing. And I read Joseph Conrad, not as now Joseph Conrad, probably in the Heart of Darkness, is used as a textbook for many school kids. And then George Orwell, you all know, 1984, and Animal Farm. But one book that I liked was, it was sort of how to say it, that he one time tried to live few months without a single pound in his pocket as a sort, and how he was treated, how he lived. So that book was really something new, and it was written probably in the 30s or 40s. So, and George Orwell, of course, he was born in India. And then Eric Newby, this is also another writer. He writes mostly travel stories. I like him. Somerset Maugham, I read almost everything that he has written, and I didn't know much about his life, but later on I read. I was quite surprised, but he writes the female characters are very, very nice in his books, even though he himself was a gay man. Richard Dawkins as a science writer, I love him. He has also written books about religion. or Against Religion, The God Delusions, which I read and I liked. I read, as I said, V.S. Naipaul. Those who know about Naipaul, he is, of course, the name's Nobel laureate, Indian origin, but from Trinidad. His parents actually were, his grandparent was actually a indentured laborer taken by the British. So Naipaul was born there, but he is basically an English writer. He came to Oxford in the early 50s, and then he has been writing. People say sometimes that he is anti-Muslim, he is anti-African, but his writing is extremely powerful. He doesn't use extra words. He absolutely avoids adjectives. And one thing is that although people claim that he is anti-Muslim, his second wife was a Muslim. She is actually still alive. Nadira. One thing I found out that Nadira was one time a student of Holy Cross College in Bangladesh, in Dhaka. That is in 1960s. So these are small things that actually makes reading Naipaul even more interesting. Many of you probably don't know that Naipaul had a brother, very talented brother. His name is Shiva Naipaul. And I feel that he would have been had he lived, he would have been as good as his brother. I have not had two Nobel laureates in literature, two brothers, but unfortunately he died very early in his late 30s. So so I feel for Shiva, but then this is the story of another writer that I like, is John Morris. I see that John/Jan Morris. This John Morris, I'll tell you why Jan Morris also. John Morris wrote a book about Oman. He came here in 1950s, early 50s, and he traveled with the Sultan at that time for 4 months. He went different places. So he wrote a book, Sultan in Oman. Later on, he wrote other travel books mostly, and he changed his gender. He now goes as Jan Morris, and he has written a book about that, this change from male to female, and I think she is still alive. But very interesting thing is that his wife of many years did not leave him. So they are still together when they were together. So this is about John or Jan Morris. Okay. I lived in America for 8 years and I read plenty of American writers. And these writers are all new writers, very contemporary writers. And they wrote about their time, mostly in 60s, 50s. Some are Philip Roth. I read quite a lot. This is another book that he wrote that brought tears to my eyes. It is about patrimony. It's somewhere in the how he looked after his father for 1 year before his father's death. And it's very touching. That is Philip Roth. Of course, he wrote very naughty books like Portnoy's Complaint, and of course there are many other books that he wrote. And Saul Bellow, I read a few of his books. Powerful Nobel laureate. Funny books, Kurt Vonnegut. Female writer Toni Morrison. Black writer. Strong writer. She also won Nobel Prize. And I am sure all of you know about The Great Gatsby, Scott Fitzgerald, and wonderful writer, good, easy reading, Ernest Hemingway, For Whom the Bell Tolls, his life in Paris. Of course, there have been few movies made of him. One writer that I like extremely is Gore Vidal. I have many of his books, and the books that he wrote, and he was extremely witty. He actually was related to the Kennedys, actually Kennedy's wife, John Kennedy's wife. His grandfather was a senator, so he has written a lot about those. He was also a gay man, and he wrote a very touching love story based on his life that depicts his love for another young man. It was banned, it was this, that. It was a wonderful story. Similarly, the black writer, James Baldwin, another gay man, he has also written powerful novels. So these are some of the American writers. Okay. Anybody to make any comment, questions?
Okay, Mr. Mushtaq, I have a question.
Yes.
You were talking about your traveling, and before going to those places, you read about those books, right?
Yes.
So how does it help you?
I think it makes me understand the people better. If I read a story, a novel that is based in a particular city that I'm going, or the city itself, that helps. Travel books are fine, but also, so it helps in that way, and I don't feel lost. Of course, my wife is there, so I never feel lost, but it helps. It helps to know the country better, the people better, and I have done that.
Possibly it becomes easier for you to roam around because you know the culture and tradition of those countries.
Yes, yes.
And so naturally you know how to behave with people, how to do the non-verbal or verbal language, everything that you use, you know beforehand. So there is no, conflict over there.
Right? Yeah, that's true. But of course there are tour guides, this and that, they help. But I want to go a bit more. When I went to Prague, I think books of Milan Kundera helped me to understand the city better. Little Kafka that I wrote also about Prague. And actually I went to see the room that Kafka used to live. And it was a very small room. So I felt that no wonder he writes about some of these dark writings of his, that he was suffering from TB. He lived very poor in a small room. So no wonder that his writings are extremely bleak. Yes.
Yeah, and you also mentioned about George Orwell. Like his books are almost, I would say, very historical. You can know about the history of those times, and actually, there you can relate it with today's world also.
Yeah, very true. Actually, there is a book about Catalonia. Actually, he went to, like Hemingway, he went to fight for the against Franco in Barcelona, in Catalonia. I have been to Barcelona many times, so I felt good reading about his writings. That particular book, it's a short book, so and of course,
I love the book Animal Farm.
Yes.
That is very interesting, I would say.
Definitely, yes. What is that called? All animals are equal, except some animals are more equal than others. So, yes, very true, very true.
The last lines are very interesting.
Yes,
You can actually relate with our present, or not right now, but a few days back. You can relate all the historical facts about this political system. Right?
Very true, actually. Orwell was a very communist, but later on he got disillusioned because of what happened in Stalin's Russia. Right. And that is the result that he wrote such a critical book of, like Animal Farm, that it is a It is a reflection of his ideals and his betrayal of his dreams, and it shows. Yes.
Thank you, Mushtaque. Thank you.
Okay. So, can you see me or? Okay. All right. Okay. So this, I started reading Japanese literature, not extensively, but, and of course, there have been few Nobel laureates, and one writer that I read extensively is Murakami. And I expect that he will win Nobel Prize in the coming years. Every year, this is one prize I wait to hear who is getting it. And one thing that he is my age, probably 2-3 years senior to me. And then I also read quite extensively Kawabata. Kawabata actually killed himself when he was exactly my age. He was at that time at 66. He could not write anymore. He had no more probably love left. He was very fond of young women, and he felt that they're not for him anymore. And then one day he just gave up and he killed himself. And some of these books like Snow Country, then The Sleeping Beauties, they are very reflective of his life. And I was quite surprised reading another book about modern Japan by an American writer. Women that is depicted in the Snow Country actually existed. She was a geisha and she actually survived. I mean, she lived beyond Kawabata and she had a pretty normal life and after his death. So anyway, so this is one that I like. Then, as I told you before about Kenzaburo Oi and Yuko Mishima, also another person who killed himself using harikiri. He was a very nationalistic writer. And then there is a female writer who I like. I have read few of her books, Banana Yoshimoto. But one thing I felt, I may be wrong, that the Japanese writer probably like I should not generalize, that people are a bit sad. This sadness shows up in their writings. Of course, some of them actually are sad people, but of course, excellent writers. So this is one thing about my Japanese reading. Okay, should I go to the next slide? Orhan Pamuk. Okay. This is another writer that I've been reading for quite some time, and I was always hoping that he would win Nobel Prize, and he did. Again, I sometimes find similarities. He actually, my age, probably, again, 3-4 years. He lived in Iowa. He is the father of one daughter. And there are a few things. And as I said, that he has written book extensively about Istanbul. And most of his books are actually, some are very intensely love stories. Of course, he is not liked by his government. I have talked with quite a few Turkish people and they don't like him very much. This is because of the politics, because Orhan Pamuk is extremely liberal. He is very supportive of Kurdish and Armenians, the Greek people of Turkey, and that made him very unwelcome by the government. So, but again, he is a Nobel laureate, so he has the protection, and I hope he stays long, live few more years. I always thought that his books are also he writes about melancholia, depression. So, and his wife left him many years ago, and he was living alone his mother was not talking to him because mother was upset that he was spilling the family secrets, and he showed more, love for his dad, who was hardly in his life, than to his mother. So his mother never stopped talking to him. I don't know whether they're in talking terms. But I was very happy to see that even at this age 70, few months ago, he got married second time. So I thought that he will continue to be a depressive person and write about melancholia, but seems like he has found happiness at last. Of course, I don't need to talk about Gabriel Garcia Marquez, another Nobel laureate, and again, extremely powerful writer. I read his autobiography, and I was always hoping that he would write the second part, which probably he never got into that. I did not know about Annie Arno probably before 2 years ago, but I think last year, I think he got Nobel Prize. And then I, of course, downloaded some books and read, and I loved her actually. She writes her story about her family, about her father or the mother. It is like any normal family, and she writes it in such a simple way, but it leaves a impression on your heart as if you are watching them. So, of course, Isabel Allende, that's another writer from Latin America, from Chile. And this other writer that I like, I have not read too many, Azad Nafisi, an Iranian writer. She was a university teacher teaching English literature. And there is a very famous book, Teaching Lolita in Tehran, or something in that line. And this is after the Islamic Revolution, how she used to teach her students in sort of secretly, so that the government doesn't know that she is doing that. Of course, Gunter Grass, and again, I read few like Tin Drum, and his autobiography is, of course, very high quality. He is very truthful. He is very bold in what he wrote. And Gunter Grass actually lived quite a while in Calcutta, and he also visited Bangladesh, lived in Dhaka. So he's one of us in that way. I did not read Milan Kundera for many years because I thought that he is probably more of course, he was anti-Russian and in the 70s, and later he went to France, and maybe his politics was not my kind of politics, so I avoided him. But then when I started reading, I loved him, really. He is a good storyteller. And Elif Shafak is another Turkish woman. When I talk with Turkish people and I say that the only writer I read is Orhan Pamuk, and they get upset. They say, why don't you read Elif Shafak and this and that? So I tried to read her. She's a good writer, but very emotional, her writing, I felt. And I like writing which are a bit tempered, not too emotional. And Elif Shafak is a bit emotional, like Paul Coelho, which I absolutely don't like. So anyway, these are some of the writers. I have many. If I want to talk about them, it will take hours. So, okay, South Asian writer. Yes, this is one genre of writing that of course they write about Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and you can relate, the locations. I visit many of those locations. I've been to Sri Lanka, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, of course, is my home country. So, Khuswant Singh, of course, he lived up to 99 years old. He was born, I think, in Lahore, and he has written some extremely touching books about partition of India. He wrote, of course, some humor books, some books on religion as well. He is a versatile writer, and he wrote a book about Delhi, and this is one book that I read in Delhi. Another Bengali writer is Amitabh Ghosh. I think he is exactly my age. I'll not be surprised in 10 years' time if he gets a Nobel Prize. He has written, and he actually grew up in Dhaka for a few years because his father was working as a military attaché in East Pakistan, that is in 1960s, 63 and that time. And in some of his books, he writes about that period. Although he was a student of a St. Gregory's school, but he saw something that has always, because there was a riot, Hindu-Muslim riot, all through the subcontinent. And I remember that riot because I was living in an area where there are a lot of Hindu people. And of course, it was a religious riot and a lot of Hindus were killed all over. Of course, Muslims also died. So, but in East Pakistan at that time, in Narayanganj, where we lived, I saw those. But of course, I could not relate. But now when I see his writings, I know it reminds me his writing. Another writer, Indian writer, is Siddhartha Mukherjee, also from his ancestors. Her father was born in Bangladesh. Now they live in India. Of course, Siddhartha Mukherjee is a very famous cancer specialist, but he writes about medicine, and he has written some books, and they became extremely popular. It was difficult subjects like cancer, like gene, like cell, and they became bestsellers. So he has written those books, and he doesn't write that much, but his books are Salman Rushdie. Many people don't like him, but I love him, and I think that he probably will. He's an extremely powerful writer. I will not be surprised if his politics is not good, but probably he may end up with a Nobel Prize someday. Another Sri Lankan writer is Michael Ondaatje. He is a mixed race, more European and local. So they call them Vargas. So he has written, and I read some of his books, but one book he wrote about his father. And I see that many of the writers write about their father. Michael Ondaatje's father was an alcoholic. He was an absolutely bad husband, a bad dad. He wrote very lovingly about his dad. Similarly, as I said, that Philip Roth wrote about, Orhan Pamuk wrote about his dad. So sometimes I wonder why they try to write so lovingly about their dads who are not very much present in their lives. Pakistani writer Hossain, he has written some good books. A book was made into a movie, A Reluctant Fundamentalist. And he's young, so he'll continue to write. Jhumpa Lahiri is another Bengali origin writer. She has written some good books, and she is probably doing something very interesting, that she has learned Italian. She's not married to an Italian, and now she writes only in Italian. And her books are then translated into English, although English probably is her first language, although she is Bengali origin. But she has written some books in Italian. Of course, some very strong negative review that those translations are much better than her original book. So this is another thing that should writers, when they migrate to another country, should they try to write in another language, which is more like not a native language or a mother tongue. Then there are two mother-daughter writers, again, very well-known, Kiran Desai and Anita Desai. And they have some Bangladesh connection, that Kiran Desai is the daughter, Anita Desai is the mother. She's a professor of MIT now. And Kiran Desai, our grandfather, or Anita Desai's father, was from Dhaka, our capital, who married a German lady, German Jewish lady, and of course they come from that. And one time I was listening to a interview of Kiran Desai, and she was saying in CNN, my grandfather is from Bangladesh and this and that. Another writer that I like, Pico Iyer, again, very nice, very easy, readable writer. Similarly, Vikram Seth, many of you know that his book, A Suitable Boy, was made into a movie, into Netflix. And another writer, probably most simple writing. He writes mostly for children, but I like his Ruskin Bond. He's still alive. He lives probably in his 80s or 90s in a hill station in India. And there are some Bangladeshi writers who also write. Adib Khan from Australia, he has won some prizes. Zia Haider Rahman, his book also won from London, but Monica Ali, Brick Lane, it has been made into a movie. Tahmima Anam, Rumman Alam, these are some of them have been made the list of writers. Okay. Now I like to say something that easily I don't like to associate religion with anything. What is Islamic science, Islamic Republic, or Hindu history, and or a Muslim writer or a Christian. But there are some Jewish writers. They actually wrote mostly about Jewish life, and that actually opened my eyes. I remember in 1979, I was in school, not high school, I was in the university early years, and at that time, one writer named Isaac Bashevis Singer, won the Nobel Prize, 1978 or 1979. Of course, in those days, it would be almost impossible to get a book, and I didn't have money. I was a student. So the only place where I could even think of getting a book was this American Cultural Center. They had a library, and I found some books, so I borrowed those books. And he wrote, at least in those books, extensively about the Jewish life in Eastern Europe. And this Jewish life is mostly Orthodox Jewish life. And I was, how to say, it was opened my eyes. And later on, of course, I read other writers who write about Jewish life exclusively, and then others. So Amos Oz, Bernard Malamud wrote about Jewish experience in New York, David Grossman in Israel. So that's why I say that to these writers, I had any prejudices, bias I had, probably their writings helped me to overcome those. So I am really, really grateful to them. And I remember that in 1982, I went for my master's to Honolulu, Hawaii, 1982. At that time, a movie, some of you probably know about that, Yentl, Barbara Streisand. It was about, Judaism is very male-dominated. There is almost no role of women in, at least in religious aspects. But this one rabbi allowed her daughter to learn everything about the religion, about Talmud and others. And then she more or less became a boy, a male, and started teaching the other males about. And then, of course, there is the love story, but here this girl Yentl is a female, but in the movie, in the story, she pretends to be a man, so attracted another man, and how do you get out of that? So anyway, that's a very beautiful story and a beautiful movie. So that was the first movie I saw in USA in 1982. Okay, so this is, I think I'm almost to the last page. Some of the books that I read in the last few months. This is one book, America Day by Day. It is by Simone de Beauvoir, if I have pronounced her name correctly. Probably many of you know. Jean-Paul Sartre's partner. So she, in 1947, traveled to USA and she stayed there 4 months and she went all different places. So it's almost how many years now? 60, 70 years, 1947, 75 years ago. And her observation, and she wrote many positive things at the same time, many of the dark sides of American life, especially the treatment of black people. So it was really fascinating reading. And what I liked that at the end, she comes back to France. And the moment she landed, she started looking everything she found very depressing. Of course, France just came out of Second World War, but she came from a very rich country like USA. Everything looked very, very, how to say, poor. So all through the book, she was complaining about the Americans, but the moment she comes back, she started complaining about her own country, or her own people. So anyway, that shows that some of how America spoils you, riches, the life and everything. Okay. So there are other books. What Am I Doing Here by Bruce Chatwin. This is what I said at the beginning, that this is not my topic that I can talk about, how books improve the quality of your life. That is the exact title, What Am I Doing Here? But it is Bruce Chatwin. It's another beautiful book. And Paul Bowles, again in the 50s, very well-known writer. He writes travel books. And of course, there are novels, fiction. And as I said, that I read the recent Nobel laureate Annie Arnaud, very simple, straightforward. A Pakistani writer, Rafia Zakaria, wrote about the immigrant life, those who came from India to Pakistan. And this is another, One Life is Not Enough. I think that he tells it's about a famous politician in India. And that's probably the story of everybody's life, that one life is not enough. And I read extensively Kawabata. And then there are travel books, old travel books by Harry Philby, Heart of Arabia, and Road to Mecca. One time I went for a consultancy in Vienna, and then in front of the IAEA building, it's a beautiful building, there is a small road. It's called Muhammad Assad Plaza. And I was a bit surprised why a Muslim's name is in IAEA. And then I found out about him, and it's a very colorful life. And he has written a book. He has written quite a few books, that he's actually a Jewish convert who became Muslim, and later on he actually lived in Mecca, and he witnessed a lot of the things that was happening in the 30s, 40s, 50s in Arabia, and he traveled from Europe through Jordan, through Palestine, and then to Saudi Arabia. Later on, he became a diplomat for Pakistan. It's a very colorful life, and this particular book is a very interesting book. And I read, as I said, Hossain Ahmed's, this book was made into a movie, that how many of modern day, very modern, very smart people, how they are being sucked into this fundamentalism. So it's a very touching story. Okay, my last page, I will go into this. These 4 books I actually bought last month when I was in Melbourne. And So I'm reading those, and I was really happy to be able to buy books after some time. So I don't know whether you can see that. So this is one book, Orhan Pamuk, and it is actually a book about plague. And this particular story deals with a plague that was pretty common in the days of Ottoman Empire. This is about Sultan times, and he writes about an island. And Orhan Pamuk's mother came from an island of Crete. And those who know about Crete, that it was actually a Turkish town. It was in Greece, but it was a Turkish Ottoman city. It was almost 50% of the population were Turks, but of course, after I don't know exactly when, and similarly, Antalya or Smyrna, that is Izmir. Izmir was a Greek town, so there was a large-scale population exchange. So all the Turks from Crete came to Turkey, and all the Greek people from Izmir actually went to this Greek island, Crete island. So this, some say, he doesn't agree, but he says that this particular book is situated in Crete. I'm actually going to the island of Crete this month, next month, for a conference. My main conference is fine, but I want to be a tourist. I want to see that how a particular city could be a 50% Turkish, and there is nothing left of Turkish population there, not a single one. And
how many pages are there in this Pamuk's book?
Yeah, this is a pretty thick book. I think 600-700, but I will get to it. It will take me, as I say, almost 700 pages, but I will get to that. It will take me a while, but I will carry it with me to the island of Crete and read it there. And of course, I have few other books that I have started reading. Okay, I think that's where I will stop. Recently, actually, I read another book that made me think. This book was again by a Nobel laureate, Gurna. Gurna is a writer actually from Zanzibar, but he is settled in UK. And the book is about a person who builds his life from scratch in UK. And but he has secrets that he has to hide from his. He met his wife in UK. He has children born there. They are adult. So he was. How much to tell your family about your dark history that you. So it made me think that many of our immigrants is one thing, and those who are married to women from another culture, how much you tell them your life story. So that was one book that made me think. And I have few other books here that I actually, one time there was a Bengali writer I was very fond of, Bibhuti Bhushan. He wrote about nature. There were no other human characters. Recently, probably this Soul Mountain is another Nobel laureate. He also writes only about trees. And it was fascinating, like this Walden of Thoreau. But I find them a bit wanting in the sense that there are no characters. You cannot. Yes, you can look at a pond again and again and again, but you miss people in these writings. So I read, but not that much. So anyway, I also read extensively about female writer. One writer that I like is Doris Lessing, another Nobel laureate. And she actually very, how to say, powerful and very open. She wrote about her life, so her autobiography and her books, very feminist. So, but few books that I like is that anybody can read. I have given this book, Bill Bryson. I have said, I have read almost everything that he has written. He was born in Iowa. I lived in Iowa for 4.5 years. So he has written a book about his growing up in Des Moines, Iowa, and same age as mine. So this is my story of reading. I don't know whether you gained anything from this other than hearing about my life and my reading history. I personally don't like to talk too much about myself, but Manju asked me to talk about it, so that's why I am here. I hope those who are still with me, I hope you learned something, at least some book titles that you may remember. Okay, that's all. That's all, Manju.
So thank you to Dr. Mushtaq for illuminating us with your wide knowledge of reading books. Truly, we learned a lot, and I'm sure many of us will start reading books more passionately than before. Because those who have been watching, I'm sure they are interested in book reading.
Otherwise, who would want to listen to me? Yes.
Well, dear viewers, you can see how immensely beneficial it is to read. It contributes so much that UNESCO organizes and celebrates World Reading Day on April 23rd each year. It is to promote the enjoyment and benefits of reading books. Book reading actually helps us appreciate the world around us. It helps lower stress levels, and according to a study conducted by the University of Hossain, reading can reduce stress levels.
Oh, yes, definitely, it does.
And Mushtaq, you mentioned that maybe it does not help you sleep better, but research says that it helps sleep better at night.
Okay, not for me. I am a depressive person, but anyway, I will agree to that. I will agree to that. Yes.
And from your experience, I can also say that reading contributes us to understand the world around us.
Yes,
it helps us to know the history, traditions, cultures, myths, and people all around the world. It also keeps our minds active and enhances our creative ability.
Yes.
It also helps our vocabulary, because you see, when we read, there are so many words that we can grasp from the reading, and it also develops our communication skills.
Very true.
As well as it helps us to gain knowledge. At the same time, it entertains us.
Very true.
Another very powerful word.
Yes, that's why I tell that we should give books and cats to the soldiers rather than guns.
Yes. Right. It was done actually during
books
World War II.
And cat. A cat will keep people happy. And books. And by the way, I've read some books about cats. There is the cat comes again and again mostly in Japanese literature. The Japanese love their cat. Murakami is known as a cat writer. So there is a book, I Am a Cat, by a famous Japanese
I've
writer.
heard about that. Right.
Yes.
And a study also suggests that elderly people who read regularly are 32% less likely to experience mental decline like Alzheimer's and dementia. So I think we should read more.
Okay.
And it is also like all the historical, I would say that most of the historical leaders were truly very passionate readers, and they learned so much about war and strategy from those books.
Yes, of course.
And it is fascinating, to know that some of the most successful business leaders, such as Bill Gates, Oprah Winfrey, and Elon Musk, have associated their career success to reading.
I fully agree.
And it has so much impact that a new discipline in the fields of psychiatry and clinical psychology called bibliotherapy is gaining momentum. And it has been internationally recognized in the United States, and it is spreading in Europe as well. especially in UK. So bibliotherapy, the new psychiatric discipline is coming up. And I believe knowing the benefits, let's pick up a book today, all of us, and lose ourselves in the magical world of knowledge, entertainment, and wealth.
Tasneem,
Thank
you
you
said
once again.
so much better in a few minutes than what I could do in last 1 hour.
Mushtaq bhai, I just summarized what you have been telling from your experiences. I just tried to summarize. And thank you once again, Mushtaq bhai, for sharing your invaluable experience with us. Thank you, dear viewers. Have a wonderful time reading books. Thank you.